Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
"33 Iraqis were killed in separate incidents in Iraq. Gunmen waged 2 attacks in Mosul, killing 6 people in an attack on the municipal building of Nainawa, and the other attack was on a U.S. patrol unit. Prior to that, a car bomb exploded in northern Baghdad, killing 14 people. Meanwhile, masked gunmen raided the Syria police station, west of the capital, killing 13 policemen. Also, an attack on a U.S. patrol unit claims the life of a U.S. soldier and wounds 2 others.
A
bloody day in Iraq kills and wounds dozens of Iraqis. This is becoming a standard scene in Iraq under occupation. This time, 2 separate operations were conducted. The first in the city of Sadia, south of Baghdad, where masked gunmen raided a police station and showered it with mortar shells before seizing control of the building in what seemed to be an organized operation. The gunmen released 51 detainees and opened fire at police vehicles, setting them on fire and filling the area with heavy clouds of smoke. The second attack occurred when gunmen detonated a car bomb outside a Shiite mosque in the district, which is part of a troubled area in northern Baghdad. The attack killed and wounded dozens of people, noting that this neighborhood is known to harbor Saddam Hussein loyalists. Armed men were seen in the Azamiya neighborhood carrying RPGs. Then another car bomb exploded.
There were many serious injuries, and a number of people were killed. There were about 32 injury cases.
The most recent attacks occurred in Mosul, killing at least 6 Iraqis during 2 operations. One of the attacks was on the Nainawa municipal building, and the second attack was on a U.S. patrol unit. The U.S. forces clashed with armed Iraqi fighters in Ramadi, and gunmen attacked a voting station in Basra. These attacks on police stations and checkpoints aim at weakening Malawi's government to expel the U.S. forces from Iraq and threaten the upcoming elections, which are being described as the first democratic election in decades and is scheduled for January 30th, 2005. U.S. forces, however, fear the situation in Iraq and admitted that the violent attacks by the resistance fighters will increase as the date of the election approaches. The Pentagon announced that it will increase their troops in Iraq from 138,000 soldiers to 150,000 soldiers by January. The countdown for the elections planned for next month have begun, as military actions against the occupation forces have escalated in cities such as Baghdad and Mosul, as well as other Iraqi cities. The countdown to the Iraqi elections have begun, as the number of operations in resistance to the occupation have increased in various parts of Iraq. The Iraqi capital, Baghdad, is witnessing another day of fighting. The occupation helicopters can be heard hovering over Baghdad, as missiles are exploding on the ground. Amid the military game of advancing and retreating between the occupation forces and the fighters, the sound of explosions and sirens were clearly heard from inside the U.S. fortified green zone, where the headquarters of the Iraqi government and the American and British embassies are located. Though the occupation military is not releasing information on the source or nature of the missiles, in their most recent death toll, they reported that a U.S. soldier was killed and 4 others were injured. A bomb attack on a U.S. military convoy outside of Baghdad killed an American firefighter and injured another, and also killed one Iraqi man and injured at least 11 others. Mortar shells were fired at the head office of the Iraquna Company for cellular phones in the Arasadi neighborhood of Baghdad. At the same time, another Iraqi man was injured near the headquarters of a Communist Party. The Independent Iraq Group was preparing for a conference on the elections at the Abu Nawas Theater when they came under a missile attack, wounding several people.
There were explosions. 3 were injured and 1 worker was killed. It was about 10:30 and we were standing at the corner. Then we heard a mortar shell being fired from the area of Masafi and Dura. Mortars were hitting the castle and other areas. We didn't feel anything until one dropped right there.
How many victims were there?
1 worker from the group over there.
In Khalis, north of Bakuba, unknown gunmen assassinated 2 city council members. Meanwhile, 2 other armed men attacked the home of the top-ranking official, wounding 2 people. The kidnapping of Tamar Shakar, member of the council of the Salah al-Din municipality in Latifia, part of what is called the Deadly Triangle, has been announced. In Pichi, a car bomb exploded near a checkpoint set up by the National Guards west of the city, killing 2 people and wounding 2 members of the National Guard. The occupation forces in Mosul were not spared from the attacks, as the resistance waged new operations, killing 1 U.S. soldier. According to a U.S. military statement, the soldier died when his patrol unit came under attack. According to medical sources, unknown gunmen assassinated an officer from the Iraqi National Guard near the holy city of Karbala. Meanwhile, the U.S. occupation forces admitted that 71 American soldiers were killed in an attack on the city of Fallujah, led by U.S. Marines, in an effort to seize control of the city.
مدينة الفلوجة.
At least 25 Iraqi civilians and police have been killed in attacks in the capital Baghdad. A car bomb killed 14 people at a Shiite mosque in the tense northern Baghdad neighborhood of Adhamiyah. The attack after dawn prayers stoked fears that sectarian divisions over when to hold elections could unleash further bloodshed. Witnesses in the staunchly Sunni northern neighborhood said the car bomb followed an initial blast believed to have been caused by a mortar. In a second dawn attack, guerrillas fired mortars at a police station near the notorious airport road in the southwest of Baghdad, and then stormed the building, hunting down and shooting the occupants. At least 11 policemen were killed and 6 wounded. The attackers set free around 50 prisoners and set 2 police pickup trucks ablaze. Clouds of thick, dark smoke poured into the air. In an internet statement, the guerrilla group led by Al-Qaeda ally Abu Musab al-Zarqawi claimed responsibility for the attack. In the northern city of Kirkuk, the U.S. military said an American soldier was killed by a roadside bomb. Also in northern Iraq, masked gunmen set up a checkpoint southeast of Mosul. About a dozen gunmen armed with rocket-propelled grenade launchers and assault rifles manned the checkpoint on a highway in Al-Wahda neighborhood. Yesterday, gunmen shot and killed a U.S. soldier in Mosul as he was conducting patrols. Mosul has been tense since insurgents launched an offensive against U.S. and Iraqi security forces in the city last month, overrunning police stations and attacking a convoy of vehicles. Germany has pledged to broaden its role in the training of Iraqis and host an investment conference for Iraq. But Berlin, a vocal opponent of the war in Iraq, stuck to its position that any such aid must be conducted outside the country. At a news conference in Berlin following a meeting with Iraqi interim Prime Minister Iyad Allawi, Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder said Germany was prepared to begin training Iraqis in bomb disposal techniques in Germany. Schroeder has refused to send German troops to Iraq, but 30 German soldiers recently began teaching Iraqi officers how to operate military vehicles at a facility in the United Arab Emirates. Last month, in a major boost for Iraq, Germany and the United States brokered a multinational agreement to forgive up to $33 billion of Iraqi debt. Alawi estimated that 80% of the country was now safe from insurgents and that efforts were underway to extend security to other areas ahead of the elections. Alawi urged Germany to take a more active role in Iraqi reconstruction.
We have concluded today very positive items of discussion, and we will follow them through. As the political process would mature in Iraq, hopefully we will get more and more cooperation with Germany and with Europe. We feel Germany could play a significant role in the reconstruction of Iraq.
Meanwhile, police arrested 3 Iraqis in anti-terror raids across several cities. Germany's federal prosecutor said tapped telephone conversations indicated the 3 men had planned an attack on Alawi. NATO's Secretary General has made an unannounced visit to Baghdad, the first trip by a high-ranking alliance official since the start of the U.S.-led war. Yabdeh Sheffer made Iraqi Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zebari to discuss the training mission, which NATO wants to expand this year into an officers' training academy. Currently, the NATO presence in Iraq is around 70, but the officers' training academy will ultimately be equipped with some 300 trainers. NATO, whose members include France and Germany, oppose the war in Iraq and have vetoed any future combat role for the 26-member alliance. But the U.S. is trying to get NATO more involved in Iraq, and U.S. President George W. Bush is planning a visit to Brussels shortly after his January 20th inauguration to meet NATO and EU leaders.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell said in an interview with the Radio Sawa, UN Resolution 1559 reflected the will of the international community. He called Syria to that into account. Meanwhile, Washington said it would encourage the resumption of direct talks between Israel and Syria after Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon suggested he would respond favorably to an overture from Syrian President Bashar al-Assad under certain conditions.
U.S. State Department spokesman Richard Boucher said Washington has always supported the idea of comprehensive peace in the region and direct contacts between both sides in order to make progress on comprehensive peace. Boucher noted that Secretary of State Colin Powell had expressed similar sentiments last month while in the Middle East, notably with Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk Sharra, whom he met in Egypt, and repeated a U.S. offer to assist in bringing the two sides together. Sharon said he would be willing to meet with Assad under certain conditions in his first response to a peace overture, the Syrian leader enunciated in late November, but added that he did not see any real sign Syria wanted peace. Sharon said Syria has not taken even the smallest step to rein in the Lebanese Hezbollah group along the Israeli border or stop supporting what he called Palestinian terror groups. But Damascus swiftly said Sharon's reply was unacceptable because it came with strings attached, and Syrian state radio accused Israel of deliberately trying to break efforts to restart peace talks that have been stalled for nearly 5 years, since they collapsed in acrimony over the fate of the Golan Heights. In Damascus, Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk Sharra said his country wanted to conduct negotiations without conditions. Sharra stressed Assad's offer was for talks without conditions and that Sharon's response was therefore unacceptable. Syria said this week it wanted the negotiations to restart from the point where they were broken off in January 2000, when, according to Damascus, the late Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin agreed to a full Golan Heights out. The sticking point has long been the fate of the strategic Golan Heights, which the Jewish state occupied in 1967 and later annexed it.
Prime
Prime Minister Jean-Pierre Raffarin called for halting the transmission of Al Manar channel 2 weeks after the Lebanese channel signed an agreement with France's Higher Audiovisual Council to broadcast inside the European Union. Raffarin said Al Manar's programs are incompatible with French values. But Al Manar channel officials say the campaign against Al Manar is being lobbied by Israel.
In the latest move against Al Manar channel, French Prime Minister Jean-Pierre Raffarin called for it to be taken off air. Raffarin told the French Senate Al Manar's programs are incompatible with the French values. It's clear, he said, that this will lead to the termination of the contract between France's Higher Audiovisual Council CSA and Al Manar. 2 weeks ago, the channel was authorized to broadcast by satellite inside the EU after it signed an agreement with the CSA not to incite so-called hatred or violence. But on Wednesday, the CSA made an official submission to France's highest administrative court, the State Council, asking it to outlaw the channel. The State Council is to rule by December 15th. Raffarin said he regretted not having the powers to shut down Al Manar's broadcasts by government decree. As a substitute, he will launch an initiative to give him the means to interrupt immediately any programs that transmit hate, violence and human indignity, as he said. Al Manar News Director Hassan Fadlallah said such declarations are but political pressures ahead of a legal ruling. Fadlallah said Al Manar does not have any problems with French laws and values which it shares, particularly justice, freedom and human rights. Rather, he said, problems come from the incitement by the Israeli organizations and lobby. Israeli Foreign Minister Sylvain Shalom earlier praised the French government. He said his ministry has campaigned against Hezbollah in Europe, and the step taken by the French government against Al Manar is one of the results of this campaign. Shalom called on the EU to classify Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, as has the United States. Raffarin said Al Manar issue would be brought up at the meeting of European heads of government later this month. In Lebanon, the government tasked Foreign Minister Mahmoud Hammoud to follow up the case. The weekly cabinet meeting regarded France's decision to hold the transmission as a violation of the agreement between Al Manar and the CSA. Information Minister Eli Ferzli said, after studying the case, the ministers found no breaches by Al Manar.
Lebanese Druze leader and MP Walid Jumblat met French President Jacques Chirac in Paris. Jumblat said after the meeting that he had obtained Chirac's reassurance that France has no intention to interfere in Lebanese politics and encourages good relations between Lebanon and Syria. A US-French-backed UN Security Council Resolution 1559 issued last September calls for a Syrian pullout of Lebanon and the disarming of the resistance.
President Jacques Chirac and France support the independence and sovereignty of Lebanon and natural healthy relationship between Lebanon and Syria. That's the core of the exclusion. Now, how to arrive at that? A dialogue process with all concerned parties must be undertaken, and also the Syrians must be made to understand that an independent, democratic and sovereign Lebanon would be an advantage. That's a challenge that is worth the effort, and I believe that with France's support we can get there.
Exactly 20 years after the lethal gas leaked from an American pesticide plant in the Indian city of Bhopal and killed thousands, survivors and relatives are still struggling to get their rights. Environmental groups accuse the United States of environmental racism.
A night that no one can ever forget. Not tens or hundreds. Thousands of people lost their beloved ones in the world's worst industrial accident that occurred on the 3rd of December 1984, when 40 tons of killer methyl isocyanated gas leaked out of a pesticide plant operated by American firm Union Carbide in Bhopal, a former Muslim principality in the heart of India.
Today was a day of extreme sorrow. 20 years back, there were bodies strewn all over this region. I saw them with my own eyes. Bodies spread on every inch of the street. Men, women, children. It was horrific. When I pass through the Union Carbide plant, it chills me.
An Amnesty report, Clouds of Injustice, estimates that 7,000 to 10,000 people died in the first 3 days of the Bhopal disaster, and 15,000 more have died in the years since. Another 100,000 continue to suffer chronic, largely untreatable diseases of the lungs, eyes and blood. Other activists said that the toll dead reached 33,000. After a protracted legal battle, Union Carbide, now a subsidiary of Dow Chemical, paid $470 million to the Indian government in a settlement reached in 1989. The Supreme Court then directed the government to pay out 8.6 million rupees to the Bhopal victims and keep the rest of the money in a dollar account in the Reserve Bank of India. All those identified as victims by the government received the first tranche of compensation from 1992. In October, the Supreme Court ordered the second tranche to be paid out from the cash in the dollar account. The survivors, mostly poor working-class people, are still crying for justice. They say they've only received about $2,223 so far for the dead, and even less for survivors. An entire generation has come of age since the cloud of gas killed and maimed thousands of victims. But memories of the chemical catastrophe haven't faded with time, as survivors continue their struggle to achieve justice.
Only hours after reaching an agreement to stop the uranium enrichment program with the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran resumed talk about its right to enrich uranium. Iran announced that it will not continue to suspend enrichment of uranium except for a few months, in defiance to the United States' desires and the European Union. While Iran linked its decision to the success of its talks with the European Union on improving political and trade policies, its changing position is provoking the United States' policies, which says it will submit the Iranian case to the United Nations Security Council. With widespread belief that Iran has scored a victory over the United States within the International Atomic Energy Agency on Tuesday, Iran said that it will continue to suspend uranium enrichment activities only for a few months. It said that the suspension will not be permanent, as agreed only the day before in Vienna with the European Union, or as demanded by the United States administration. According to Iran, it wants the world to know that its right to produce nuclear energy will not be denied. It will never give up this right.
Opposite to the American call, Iran will not give up its nuclear energy, and it will never do this at any time. Iranians are not afraid of American threats, or threats by any other country. Iran reiterates its right to benefit from nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, and it will do so.
وتريد إيران أن تعود بسرعة إلى تشغيل 20 جهازا للطرد المركزي شملها اتفاق تم.
Iran wants to quickly resume operating its 20 central diffusion systems, despite the fact that they were included in the agreement that was reached on Monday with the International Atomic Energy Agency, calling for suspending all Iran's uranium enrichment activities. It appears that Iran is satisfied with this resolution because it avoided international sanctions, which the United States is trying to impose through the Security Council. The European Union strongly believes that it has convinced Iran permanently to suspend its nuclear program by offering commercial, political, and economic incentives. However, only a few hours later, Rouhani warned that his country will immediately resume uranium enrichment and the nuclear program if Tehran feels that its talks with the European Union over improving political and economic cooperation is leading to a dead end.
I am clearly reiterating that suspension of enrichment will last for only as long as the negotiations take place, and no longer. We are prepared to cooperate. However, if we feel that the other side is wasting time, or that negotiations have reached a dead end, then we will review our decision. We are talking in terms of months, not years.
Iran is trying to walk a tightrope by cooperating with the European Union on its nuclear file. It believes that the Vienna Agreement with the Europeans has isolated the United States, which suspects that Iran is working to produce nuclear weapons and is threatening to unilaterally submit the Iranian file to the Security Council. What appears from the way Tehran is dealing with the West regarding its nuclear ambitions, that it wants to cooperate, but not to the level that it will be deprived of a right that is given to Israel. Because of this, all Iranians stand behind their government in this problem.
I want Western diplomats to leave Iran, and I want them to stop denying our right to a peaceful nuclear program.
It might be difficult now for Iran to convince the West that it wants to stop enriching uranium and that it wants to use it for peaceful purposes. It appears that Iran insists in continuing its nuclear program unless it is given something in return. Its goal is to reach an international agreement making all the Middle East a nuclear weapons-free zone. Iran is relying on complete cooperation from the Arabs.
The Iranian nuclear chief, Hassan Rouhani, said that Tehran will never give up its right to own civilian nuclear programs, and that the suspension of its uranium enrichment program will depend on the success of negotiations with Europe. Contrary to what the Americans are claiming, Iran will never give up its right to develop nuclear energy. Meanwhile, the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Halt criticized the IAEA's resolution, saying that it is unacceptable. Differences among Iranians concerning the International Atomic Energy Agency's resolution did not stop the Chief of National Security, Hassan Rouhani, from describing this resolution as a turning point and as a historic opportunity for the Iranians and the Europeans to resolve their issues away from the American monopoly.
Without a doubt, the latest agreement with the three European countries and the latest meeting at the IAEA has opened new horizons for Iran, which we can consider as a turning point in Iran's nuclear file.
Rouhani stated the advantages of the resolution, saying that the IAEA has acknowledged that the Iranian nuclear file is for civilian use, and Iran has exhibited transparency in dealing with this case. The agency also acknowledged that Iran has voluntarily agreed to suspend the uranium enrichment program, and that Iran's case is no longer in the hands of the agency's Board of Governors. Iran joined the list of countries capable of producing nuclear energy. However, the greatest achievement is in foiling the American plan to transfer the Iranian nuclear case to the UN Security Council. Despite this, many Iranians do not share Rouhani's view. The spokesman of the Iranian parliament, Halt Adel, focused on the disadvantages of the resolution, saying that they are larger than the advantages. Adel said that despite adding amendments to the resolution, it is still unacceptable, especially when considering that one of the articles demands that Tehran approve the additional protocol as soon as possible.
Concerning the additional protocol, we already began implementing it. Approving this protocol is up to the Parliament. We do not have a role in this. The Parliament will determine when and how the issue will be discussed.
The first article of the Constitution is the biggest problem for the Iranians because it does not specify how long they are expected to suspend the uranium enrichment program. They fear that this article can be understood to mean that the suspension should last indefinitely. This is a red line for Tehran, which explains why it emphasized that the suspension will only last as long as negotiations with the Europeans continue to be fruitful. Iran warned that it will continue its uranium enrichment program if the negotiations should reach a dead end. Although Iranians have some reservations concerning the IAEA's resolution, they are still relieved. The fate of the resolution depends on how negotiations with the Europeans will play out, which of course will not be easy.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.